Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. Hello and welcome to Trans Truth. We have got a lot of news to cover today, so let us dive right in. CNN is reporting that Nikki Haley, a 2024 Republican presidential contender, has linked the presence of transgender female athletes with suicidal ideation among their cisgender peers. The Centers for Disease Control studies, among other things, suicide ideation, attempts, and successful suicides. A recently published study by that body noted that 1 in 3 teen girls seriously contemplated suicide. An alarming statistic, to be sure, but that study made no connection between suicidal ideation and the existence of transgender youths or their participation on sports teams. Another CDC study found that LGBT students are far more likely to have considered, planned, and attempted suicide than heterosexual, and we assume cis, students. Haley's comments, we'd call them lies, like most of what Republicans are saying about transgender people this year, were met with criticism from mental health experts, LGBTQ advocates, and progressives. Said Heather O'Byrne Kelly, a psychologist and former House Veterans Affairs Committee staff member, Nikki Haley's suggestion that trans youth are responsible for girls' elevated suicide risks is disgusting. Let's also be clear that the suicide rate for trans youth is sky high. They need support, not blame from a politician seeking the presidency. We agree. So, people are wondering, does the recently passed bill in Texas banning, quote, sexually oriented performances in the presence of minor, unquote, aka the drag ban, put all transgender people in legal jeopardy? Dan Patrick loves to tell the lie that disgusting drag performances harm Texas children. We know that this just doesn't happen, and we'll spare y'all the Aunt Kelly rant on what grooming does look like, for now. Anyway, language in the law now prohibits, among other things, the exhibition of sexual gesticulations using accessories or prosthetics that exaggerate male or female sexual characteristics. Now, sexual gesticulations is not defined in the law, so one is left to wonder if a trans woman wearing breast prostheses or a trans man wearing a packer could be charged under the new law. Elon Musk is spreading the same hateful lies and disinformation that his Republican buddies are spewing. For a supposedly really smart guy, he's woefully ignorant about things transgender. And we might add that his recent moves to stifle opposition content to his stand on transgender is troubling. A recent New York Times opinion piece by Adam Nagorny and Jeremy W. Peters observes that when the Supreme Court declared that the right to marry was constitutionally protected for all citizens, social conservatives were, quote, set adrift. No longer did they have one of their central issues with which to motivate their base. Quote, we knew that we needed to find an issue that the candidates were comfortable talking about, unquote, said Terry Schilling of the American Principles Project, and we threw everything at the wall. The one that stuck was the idea that they could attack the growing acceptance of transgender people, especially when it comes to minors. The idea started with a handful of Republican lawmakers addressing transgender athletes. Then a few influential GOP governors jumped on board. The movement, now running at full speed, was the result of careful planning by national conservative organizations with the aim of creating yet another wedge issue, this time fanning the flames of fear around a rise in the number of young people identifying as trans. Alas, recent polling shows that most Americans are less likely to support transgender rights than the same-sex marriage or abortion rights. To their credit, the radical right may have caught lightning in a bottle. Never mind the disastrous impact these laws are already having on transgender citizens. Never mind the fact that even as they are stripping away parents' rights to seek appropriate health care for their children, the GOP lawmakers are crowing all about parents' rights. The authors of the column note the similarity between this movement and the Save Our Children campaign championed by Anita Bryant in 1977. Damn, I feel old. Anyway, we'll say it again. These campaigns have been carefully conceived, planned, and executed to engage fearful and ignorant voters. Virtually every expert in the field of transgender care will tell you that these laws will cause far more harm than good. They will cost lives. Clearly, it was never about protecting children. First, they came for the children, and I did not speak out because I was not a child. Apologies to the late Pastor Martin Niemöller, who penned that well-known First They Came for the Socialist confessional in 1946. But after doing my research and preparing our last episode, Propaganda Then and Now, I can't help but see the same kind of progressing erosion of our rights that most Germans realized only too late was happening to their society in pre-war Germany. By the way, there's a link to an article on Pastor Niemöller's confessional in the notes for this episode. In a recent story distributed by the Associated Press, link in the episode notes, of course, Hannah Schoenbaum points out that the product of the debate around Florida's war on transgender children, a law that bans evidence-based gender-affirming care for minors, will also make it difficult, if not impossible, for transgender adults to get gender-affirming care, hormone therapy in particular. Some clinics have stopped providing gender-affirming care altogether. And it turns out that the law also requires adults seeking such care to sign an informed consent form and requires a physician to oversee any health care related to transition and for patients to see that doctor in person. Patients whose primary caregiver was a physician's assistant or nurse practitioner are just SOL in Florida, at least for now. While not a direct corollary to something we noted in our last episode, the March 31, 1933 decree by the Berlin Commissioner of Health stating that Jewish doctors would no longer receive compensation from the City Health Insurance Institute for any treatment they provide is chillingly similar to the new Florida law, in that it seeks to cut off health care to a targeted group of patients. Again, I'm not saying that anyone is talking about ovens, gas chambers, or the final solution yet, but neither was anyone in 1933 Germany. And finally, this just in, as we prepared to record this episode, the Associated Press is reporting that a federal judge has temporarily blocked portions of Florida's recently passed law that would ban minors from receiving gender-affirming health care. Judge Robert Hinkle issued a preliminary injunction saying 3 transgender children can continue receiving treatment, noting that, quote, gender identity is real, and the state has no rational basis for denying patients treatment, unquote. No rational basis. Finally, it looks like someone has been listening to the smart people. Rest assured that Trans Truth will be following closely this case as it works its way through the courts. We'll be right back after this brief message from our sponsors. Welcome back. I am one of your hosts, Kelly Nelson, she, hers, and I am joined as always by...
I'm Jeri Ann, she, hers.
And we are going to be talking about something new to me, well, at least that it has a name, and that is trans broken arm syndrome. Have you ever heard of that, Jeri Ann?
I have not.
Yeah, it was a new one on me too. But it actually is a real thing. It's just that the clinicians and academicians in the UK have given it a name and are actually studying the problems. Basically, what they're saying is that trans broken arm syndrome refers to the fact that lots of doctors will turn every medical problem trans people have into something related to our gender identity. That means that even if you go in with a broken arm, you'll find medical staff start asking irrelevant questions about hormones, surgeries, or our bodies. Have you ever encountered anything like that?
Well, Kelly, when we first talked about this episode, I told you that I couldn't recall, but just now I recalled a young nurse at my primary care physician's office who asked me if she could ask some personal questions just for her information. And of course, I said yes. But yeah, she asked some very personal questions about medication, hormones, surgery, things like that. My guess is, my guess is she knew someone, and she was wanting to understand their situation, their condition, and that's so she was using me to get information. That's my guess.
Okay, yeah, so your read on it was that it was not related to whatever medical complaints you
Yes.
had. I want to say right now that I don't want anyone to take what we're saying, what we're talking about here, the wrong way. A thorough history and physical is fundamental to good medicine, but caregivers are human, and our, well, let's call it atypical clinical presentation can be distracting, just like you experienced. Anyway, there's even a thing now in the UK called the Trans Gap Project. Link to that in the episode notes. And this is a group of academicians in healthcare that are trying to study the challenges that trans patients have. As with everything else about us, there's been very little research. So this is a welcome effort to fill in that particular gap. I can't remember how many episodes ago it was, but we talked about my experience getting my first mammogram. Just to review quickly, I mentioned to my primary care provider that, maybe it was time that I get one because I've, been on hormones for, 2.5 years. And she said, sure, I'll schedule it for you, to make a long story short. And when I showed up, I ran afoul of their very binary gender protocol when it comes to getting a mammogram. If you're a genetic male and you show up for a mammogram, that has to be approved by a radiologist. If you're a genetic female, you just get your mammogram because it's a simple expected screening procedure. But for genetic males, it's considered a diagnostic procedure. So you have to have complained about some issue to have a reason to even get a mammogram. So we went round and round. I didn't get my mammogram. I complained to the patient care advocate. I got a phone call back the very next business day from a very concerned patient care advocate. They apologized up one side and down the other, and the next time I went back, I was treated just like anyone would expect, showing up for a screening mammogram. Obviously, some changes were made, and that kind of touches on the first thing that I wanted us to talk about, and that's being proactive, being an advocate for your own health care. Thoughts?
Well, Kelly, I've never experienced anything quite like that, but my story is different. I transitioned like in one day, and I stepped out of one life into another, and then set about checking all the boxes, taking care of this procedure, that procedure, and this this detail and the legal things and all that kind of stuff. But
Oh, you're talking about social transition.
social transition, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say I want some of that medicine if you did it all in one day.
Well, I stopped living as the person I wasn't, and began living as the person I was, all in one day. I didn't test the waters or anything like that. It just was all at one time. So my point is, I sought out specialists in the field, and so my experience is a little different than that. Now, let me be fair. I have been to providers for non-trans medical care, eye care, routine illness maybe, and I've gone to a new provider, and the girls up front acted extremely weird. I probably weirded them out because they had never dealt with a trans person before. But as far as hitting the wall where there's no protocol, no, I can't say that I have.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, I again going back to my discussion with my PCP about mammogram. When I first mentioned that, she knew I was trans, but when I first mentioned that, she just responded with that deer in the headlights look. She and, and then finally her face breaks and she says, "Yeah, I guess so." She never. I clearly. I was her first trans patient. She's young, very early on in her practice. I get the impression, and in my next in-person visit, she actually asked a few questions. They were medically relevant and or socially relevant, and I appreciate. She asked what my preferred pronouns were. So she'd obviously studied up on etiquette and offered to change my name in the records. I said, well, I'd love to do that. Still have my dead name as my legal name, but if you can change that and make it all work, I would love to do that. So, yeah, finding the right healthcare provider really is important.
Sure it is. And Kelly, let me just take a step to the side and let's focus on something that's related, but not technically medical care, and that's insurance. I uh,
Oh yeah,
I had a situation with my insurance company. I had surgery lined up. Everything was good to go. I had checked with them to see what the protocol. I, First of all, I went with this company because they covered the services that I needed.
yeah. This was for your GCS,
Yes,
yes.
yes. And I contacted them. I found out what hoops I needed to jump through, and carefully did everything that I was required to do. And then just shortly before my surgery date, my doctor said that the insurance company canceled my surgery. And come to find out, someone at that insurance company decided that I needed a year of psychotherapy before even qualifying for surgery. Well, to make a long story short, I had long since learned, and this is good advice for our listeners. If you're dealing with insurance, take notes. The person's name that you're talking to, the time of day, the date, all those things are not pertinent to your case necessarily, but they sound very good when you're relaying this information later on if you have a problem. So I had taken notes, and I composed a letter to the insurance company, just detailing a lot of issues, and I had a copy for the lawyer and a copy for the State Board of Insurance. And the letter stated that. So, to make a long story short, they came back and they reimbursed me for more than everything cost. So I actually made money.
This
Now I'm not going
this is going to be on the internet. Careful.
to. Well, I don't really care. It's but anyway, my point is because I took notes and because I stood my ground and I made them toe the line according to their own policy, and I was ready to take a step towards litigation and report them to the State Board of Insurance. Some heads rolled at that insurance company.
I bet.
But
I
but you
bet.
can get results, but you have to know what you're talking about. But when you state in a letter that so and so said such and such at a certain time on a certain day, it sounds like you know what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely.
And
That's
and
oh, go
when
ahead.
there's
Go
an
ahead.
inquiry on the other end, they're going to say, "Oh, no, well, let me think." They're going to sound stupid. So
Yep.
they decide
Sage advice, ladies.
right
Pay attention.
first.
Take notes. Dates, times, who said
That's
what they said.
exactly. Okay. Thanks for letting me step up on that little soapbox.
Well, you gotta be careful. You're triggering me. The only thing that well, I can't decide which pisses me off more. Insurance companies thinking that they have a right to dictate what is appropriate medical care and what isn't, or state legislatures thinking they have the right to dictate what medical care. So you're flirting with disaster and threatening to trigger an Aunt Kelly rant because
You don't know the power of the dark side.
okay, what were you gonna say?
Okay. Um, Most likely, every health insurance company has in their written in their policy that they are not health providers. They cover health coverage, or they cover health services, and it is not their job to diagnose. And here I had the insurance company or someone at that insurance company diagnosing me. So if an insurance company steps over that line from deciding what services they're going to pay for and into diagnosing you, then they have crossed the line. If you check their policy, I bet you every health insurance company has it written that they are not to diagnose.
Yeah, and they laughed when they wrote that in there. I
Mm.
bet. Let's see. We got ahead of ourselves, but it's a very good tip. Find healthcare providers who are up to speed, if at all possible. So let's continue talking about that. That's not always possible, is it?
No, it's not, Kelly. You know, I come from an area of the country where there are no services for trans people, none whatsoever. I could not find a therapist anywhere in the area. That, to my knowledge, there was not a healthcare provider to go to, and besides that, I didn't trust them. I didn't trust them. I was I had I was renowned in the area. I had acclaim, um, hundreds of friends, thousands of acquaintances. I was a public figure, and I couldn't trust going into an office or going to a pharmacy. I just couldn't do it. And so for decades, I lived with my secret and self-medicated. I mean, if you want something, you can get it. I don't recommend it until I transitioned. When I decided to transition, I sought out a uh, primary care physician who dealt with only trans people. I had to drive 2 hours for every appointment, but I got a legit prescription and got it filled at a safe pharmacy. So yeah, it's important to get the best medical care, no matter what. Even if you have to drive for it, even if you have to hunt for it.
Yeah.
Because I got
Yeah.
lucky. I got lucky, Kelly. I'm not a
Yeah.
doctor.
Well, you did the right thing though. You went to a major urban area where the likelihood of finding healthcare providers who are up to speed is high. We're lucky here in Houston. Houston is one of the country's big hubs for healthcare in general. So we're lousy with specialists in every field, but in rural areas, I say, most of Texas, it's probably the same condition. So things you need to do before you even start that hunt is educate yourself. The sad fact is that many, if not most, healthcare providers are not up to speed on our condition. So being an educated consumer is critically important. Yes, we should not need to educate our caregivers on our unique needs and conditions, but that's the reality. Suck it up and deal with it, Snowflake.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. That recent survey, I forget who did it, but found that 58% of all Americans pretty much don't believe in gender identity, gender dysphoria. They don't believe it's a real thing. So, we're fighting an uphill battle to change that. And not just with, the great unwashed, but even with the professions, the medical profession.
Well, didn't you change primary care physicians in the last year or so?
I did, but not for any reasons related to gender care.
I see.
I'm toying with that idea because I pay out of pocket for my endocrinology care, not the prescriptions, but the visits with the care provider. Thinking of rolling that all into one PCP, but I'm so happy with the one I have. I don't want to give her up. Anyway, some other pointers. If you are not out, you should nevertheless be forthcoming about your condition, signs, symptoms, etc. A lot of people are understandably reluctant to share trans-related details with a caregiver who we may think doesn't need to know about those things. But for trans patients, failing to be completely open and honest with your healthcare providers is potentially dangerous. Medication interactions are the obvious consideration, but it kind of flies in the face of what we said at the open about care providers wanting to know things about our condition that aren't relevant. So, again, you got to be an educated consumer. Understand your therapies that you're on, and as much as possible, how they might interact with any other medical condition you might have when you show up at your healthcare provider.
Yeah, I'm trying to. That makes complete sense, but I'm trying to apply that to my situation, and it would have been so hard, so hard. My life would have, my whole world would have undergone
Oh,
a
if
meltdown. Yeah,
if you had come clean
yeah,
about any
yeah,
of that
yeah.
pre-social
And I'm and,
transition,
and I'm not, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have a listener in that situation.
I would be surprised if we didn't. And that just speaks again to the problem
And
that we face with acceptance and
yeah,
understanding.
and the shame of it all is it's not a choice. I was born this way. My earliest recollection, it sucks to be transgender. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. And of course, I grew up in that corner of the world that it was so intolerant. But anyway,
We should probably talk about the discussion we had in putting our notes together for this episode. I was skeptical about healthcare providers, even in reddest Texas, billing private information. I'm a healthcare provider as my previous career, and I'm an information security specialist now. And part of that, when I'm working for a company that's burdened by HIPAA regulation, that's the Health Insurance Privacy and Portability Act, their privacy regulations are very strict, and I think it's up to $25,000 per incidence for breaching the privacy of a patient. But Jeri Ann has convinced me that in small tight knit communities, it's easy for things to leak out, and something that would be ruinous to a career is sadly something that transgender people are going to have to think about.
Well, even if HIPAA is going to rein in all healthcare providers, and your secret is safe, there is a very real fear of what would happen if your secret was out. And trans people, whether you like it or not, they have to deal with that fear. And it may not be real, but it's real to them. And I
Good
and
point.
and,
Yeah.
and I tell you what, we all live in our own reality, and you can have all the educated input that you can find, but you're still going to have your own reality that deals with your own fears.
So I've got a couple more notes here on healthcare issues for trans people, but before we dive into that, have you got anything you want to bring up?
My goodness, we've already brought out more than I expected to.
Well, let's keep that in mind. Keep thinking about it, and let's talk about hormone replacement therapy.
Okay.
Seems like whenever trans babies, that's the affectionate term we use for people that have newly come to the realization that they are trans and want to seek some kind of gender affirming care, that's almost always where they start. I know I've got some advice. You got any advice you want to give to somebody who's thinking about pursuing that?
Well, it's you need to be serious about it, and it's not something to be toyed with. It's not something to experiment with. Um, the way I understand it, I'm not a doctor, but the way I understand it, that human being needs or the human body needs a primary sex hormone for overall general good health. Your skeletal system, skin, probably all major organs rely on the dominance of a primary sex hormone. And so I think that if you're experimenting with estrogen and your primary sex hormone is testosterone, I don't know. It seems like
So you're saying that the effects of estrogen in the case of a male to female transgender patient affects more than just growing boobs.
well, yeah. If that,
Yeah,
my gosh,
yeah. Don't get ahead
oh
of me.
my gosh. Um, well, let me. I need my 2 cents worth when we get to it. But um, yeah, seek out somebody that seems to know what they're doing. It's not as mysterious as a lot of people make it out to be. I never went to a endocrinologist. I went to a primary care physician who's had I think 23 years experience with trans people, and she immediately started me out on a dosage which was the typical dosage that 99% of her patients are on, and sent me for blood work a few days later. She said, "Yep, this is the right dosage." Yeah, seek out somebody that
Yeah,
knows what they're
that's
doing.
yeah. Again, uh, living here in Houston as we do, you were able to find a primary care provider who knows more about transgender hormone therapy than probably 99% of the endocrinologists in Houston.
Yes, and let me qualify what I said about the endocrinologists are not going to. If you're taking other medications and you have other health issues, by all means, see if you can find a qualified endocrinologist. I didn't. I don't even take. I don't even get headaches. I don't take aspirin. Well, now my body's 100 years old, and I take ibuprofen. I have ibuprofen for breakfast every
Does
day,
that
but
make your boobs grow any
uh,
bigger? Yeah.
nope. Nope, nope, nope. That's a myth.
It
That's a
it
myth.
it, it is. It every once in a while you'll hear about a trans woman who grew I should say an adult post pubertal trans patient who grows a set of D cups, but that is by far the exception.
Yeah, you hear about it, but they don't offer any pictures. Yeah, at best, about HRT, be realistic going into hormone replacement therapy, and it is. You know, I know a trans woman who refused to call it HRT. She called it HT, hormone therapy, because she associated hormone replacement therapy with menopause, replacing estrogen after menopause. But if you think about it, you're replacing testosterone with estrogen and HRT, so it is hormone replacement therapy. But be realistic. At best, you're going to get a little extra growth that will help a plastic surgeon one day. But keep in mind this: a gynecologist that we both know has written tens of thousands of scripts for estrogen for women, for
Mm-hmm.
genetic women, usually postmenopausal, and knows a little bit about that. And he says that estrogen is going to have an effect on the human body that's directly related to the hormone receptors that body has.
And we're all different in that regard.
We're all different in that regard, but keep in mind that there are many cis women out there who are flat chested. Their body is designed to produce estrogen, and they're flat chested. If just taking a pill or an injection once a week or something like that would grow boobs, then 400,000 women every year would not seek out breast augmentation.
Right. Yeah, it would put the breast augmentation plastic surgeons right out of business.
It would. It would.
Well, speaking of breast augmentation, let's talk about, well, not the operation, but gender related surgeries. I think we can probably break that into three broad categories: facial feminization surgery, breast augmentation, and gender confirmation surgery. So, what should someone who's considering any or all of those procedures be looking for in a surgeon? Let's start with bottom surgery, with gender confirmation surgery, since that is by far the most complex and potentially peril ridden procedure.
Well, check out references. How long have they been doing that? Find out how long the surgery takes. There there are knuckleheads that think they're all that take 10, 12 hours for that procedure, and it shouldn't. The surgeon that I chose typically averages less than 4 hours. My surgery just took 3 hours. Of course, she had been doing that for I think 14 years at that time. But do some background check on the surgeon. Also, and a lot of those surgeons now charge for a consultation. So know that going in, because there are a lot of wannabes that tie up the doctor's time, and a lot of them have stopped the free consultation. But get to know your doctor and the office staff, and find out if they can help you with the logistics of the surgery. There are going to be weeks where you can't travel. You can't sit for more than 5 minutes at a time, so you can't travel. So if you find a doctor in New York, you're going to have to find a place to stay in New York, a place to eat in New York, and you're going to have to find someone to help you with the aftercare. So those are things to consider.
I think that's very important. It's when you aren't allowed to sit for weeks at a time, you're going to need some help doing stuff. And when it hurts to walk, you're going to need some help doing stuff.
Yeah, I flew home back to Houston from the East Coast on my 17th day, and I do not recommend that.
Yeah. What about facial feminization surgery? I'm guessing that that's and to even greater extent breast augmentation. That's easier to find someone with expertise.
Well, yes and no. There are teams of doctors who are just true artists when it comes to uh, facial surgery. But for the trans patient, it's different. There's bone structure to deal with and stuff like that. It's more than nip and tuck and little fat injection. Um, so you want a surgeon. You want a surgeon that has experience with transgender patients. Now, let me go back to the gender confirmation surgery. Even though we live in Houston, that is undoubtedly the world's largest medical center. There, I don't think there's a qualified surgeon that does gender confirmation surgery. There are one or two in the area, but they are not recommended at all. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
throw that out
We
there.
we
That
both know someone who
uh,
had a bad experience with one of those surgeons in the area.
I know two people that had a bad experience, and um, but the facial surgery, yeah, you want someone with experience because there's some unique issues with that. Now, let's see. I had a thought a minute ago, and there's nothing wrong with shopping around. There are qualified people. In fact, there are teams. My surgery was not even in this country, but there was a team of surgeons. There were four surgeons that operated on me. Uh, um, in fact, I did breast augmentation and facial all at one time. It only took 10 hours.
I remember that too. But boy, you had terrific care. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did. I
Let's talk
did.
about one more thing that seems to be skipped over a lot, and that's permanent hair removal, specifically facial hair. Jeri Ann has a favorite saying when people ask about what method should I use.
Yeah, yeah. The only uh, approved method for permanent hair removal is electrolysis. You can read all you want on the internet and in advertisement, but the USDA has only approved one method for permanent hair removal, and it's
Actually, I think it's
costly.
I think it's the FDA,
What did I say?
USDA.
USDA.
We're not talking about steaks.
Well, I haven't really had supper yet, so there you go.
Anyway, the point is other methods will work, maybe temporarily, but there's only one method that is FDA approved for removing facial hair, and that's electrolysis. And that is a long and expensive process,
And
depending
painful.
on, yeah, and painful, and depending on the nature of your skin type and the density of your beard and that kind of thing. But that is something that male to female transgender people have to deal with.
Yeah, I know we both know of a person that I'm sure has completed the hair removal now, but I remember 6 or 7 years ago when she started, she was going for several hours a week, and it took over three
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
and I think over $30,000.
yeah. That's kind of sobering, isn't it? And that
Yep.
and that is something that will not be covered by your insurance
Well,
because it's
there are some insurances that cover it. In California, I think there are some insurances that cover it, but
uh,
not in anywhere close to my world. But let's go back to the surgery. My surgeon required complete genital hair removal, and she actually had a drawing, and she drew a perimeter, and she says, make sure that it's completely gone. Now I went for hours every week for 8 months for that small area of hair removal, and you only think that facial hair removal is painful.
oh my god.
But I go back to my earlier statement that it's not a choice.
Right.
Being trans sucks. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy, because to get where you need to go, to be your authentic self, you have to go through all of this crap.
So you're saying it's not a lifestyle choice?
Hell no, it's not a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, take that, Governor DeSantis. DeSantis. Okay, any final thoughts before we start to wrap up?
Well, we didn't cover breast augmentation.
Well, let's talk about it. We got time.
Okay. Well, it's similar to facial. Seek out a surgeon that's got experience, and I would think experience with a transgender person might be beneficial. But understand that. Oh, by the way, for gender confirmation surgery, most reputable surgeons have requirements. They're going to require uh, letters of recommendation from two licensed therapists. They're going to require that you have been on hormones for a certain length of time. They're going to require that you have lived in as a female for usually it's a minimum of a year.
Yep.
They might even want proof that you have uh, worked in the workforce as a
Yeah.
female.
Yeah. Those when it comes to GCS, those are all standard part of the standard of care put together by the WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. They are the international authority on how transgender people should be cared for. And yeah, any reputable surgeon will be observing those requirements. Anyway, back to breast augmentation.
Oh, okay. That whole field has changed in the last decade or so with issues of the silicone filled sacs leaking and people getting silicone poisoning and stuff like that. And then they went to saline, and that was a whole lot safer. But I, I guess, was it 10 years ago, 15 years ago? They developed what they call cohesive gel implants, and that seems to be the way to go. With
Oh, the gummy bear
the
implants.
gummy bear, yes, the gummy bear, because with saline implants, that is just pretty much a water balloon, if you can imagine a water balloon, and there is no structure to a bag of saline. And so they look good at first, but they will sag in time, and they have to be, and they break down. And I understand that the average is they have to be replaced every 10 years. Well,
I've heard that too.
I didn't want to do it the first time, much less every 10 years. So, but the cohesive gel gummy bear implants, they don't know how long they last because they're like 20 years and going. With no sign of deterioration. So there's that gummy bear implants, and of course there's different procedures, and some surgeons do it differently. Um, but again, uh, you're not going to just get breast augmentation and go to the beach. There's recovery time for that too. I mean, there's a certain amount of time. You can't even wash your own hair. It's very difficult and painful to brush your own teeth for a while. So there's nothing easy about this.
Well, you're going to be discouraging people that are thinking this is a lifestyle choice.
I want yeah I want to discourage them.
You bet.
If you don't need this, if you don't need this for your sanity, for lack of a better way to express it, then don't do it. This is not fun and games, people. It's not fun and games.
Okay, any more final thoughts before we start to wrap this up? Okay.
No.
A new feature that we have added to each episode of our podcast is a frequently asked question. We've got the whole list of frequently asked questions on our website, www support.transtruth.info. That's .info. But we're also going to be pulling one of those questions into each episode. Oh, and look, here comes one now. Jeri Ann, how many transgender people are there?
Well, shoot, I don't know. You know, I there was a
Okay,
statistic a while back that was, I don't know, 1.6 million in this country. How they get that, I don't know. I don't think anybody counted me.
read the script.
Oh my gosh! Again, coming up with an accurate number is difficult. Uh, it would have been difficult to count me. Nobody asked. I didn't hold my hand up. There's a marked dearth of reliable research on this relatively small population. Surveys asking this type of question show a greater percentage identifying as transgender in younger age groups. But the most reasonable explanation for this is that it has become more acceptable, whereas previous generations have been reluctant to identify. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. When I got access to the internet, how it made me feel to find out that there were other people like me. Because
That
without that information, you don't know. So,
that was back in the days even before telephones, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you what, there's one other thing I'm going to say about how many trans people there are, but let me digress just a minute. In 1969, when I first went to university, as soon as I got registered, I got my ID card and I had access to the university library. I went to the card catalog, and there were two drawers for the T's for titles and authors that no they had a title catalog and they had an author catalog. There were two drawers for the T's, and so I went to the second drawer looking for transsexual, and they, believe it or not, they had a subject card for transsexual. This is 1969. I don't even know how I knew to look for that word. But there were no books in the library. They only had a subject card because this was, it was Dewey Decimal System, I guess. No, it wasn't. It was Library of Congress. That's why they had a subject card, but they had no book. I checked that card catalog over and over and over, and a couple of years down the road, lo and behold, there is a book on
Yeah.
transsexualism.
I wonder if those books are still available in Florida universities.
I'm certain they are. Florida's got top-notch universities. I mean, that's where you go to learn everything. So, most certainly, I'm sure there's anything you want to know in Florida. It's very progressive state, full of intelligent people.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Okay, all
Um,
right now, back to the number of trans people. Studies put the percentage in the U.S. at between 0.45 and 2%. Now, I have heard 1.6%, but how that source got that number is beyond me. Because, like I said, I don't think they counted me.
it is going up, and it is going up disproportionately. The younger the group being studied is, and that's probably the single most influential thing that feeds into the GOP's campaign to exploit fear and ignorance. They've characterized it as the result of grooming and indoctrination, when in fact it's the normal outgrowth of growing understanding and acceptance. Young people, are not as reluctant to come out as they were. And that's a good thing.
Kelly, your question was phrased, how many are there? Well, that question would be more accurate if it read, how many people identify or acknowledge that they are trans? Because I believe there are transsexual people who will never admit it.
I believe that's true as well, and that's sobering to be sure. Well, this one is going to be a bitch to edit. We have been out of control for almost an hour now. You have been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. We hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening. Whether you are transgender yourself, if you have a friend or loved one who is transgender, or especially if you are looking to understand more about the transgender experience. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at www.transtruth.info. That's .info. This podcast is copyright 2023 Trans Truth.